Hey everyone, my name is Todd Blyleven, and we are seconds away from I'm Going In Starting Up. It's the newest podcast sharing stories of adversity, strength, and love from some amazing guests. So here we go. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. Hey, I'd like to welcome everyone back to I'm Going In, a podcast that I created based on just our mentality of when we go into some sort of adverse situation, whether it's an extreme situation or something maybe a little bit smaller in life, but means a lot to you and results in some sort of trauma, aftermath, some way, somehow you've been knocked down. And then that moment where you defy the odds and you stand back up and you say, you know what, I'm going to go into therapy. I'm going into church. I'm going in to this day to try to make myself better. And I'm bringing on an individual that exemplifies all of this, which I'm super excited to have on the I'm Going In podcast. It's Deputy Chief for the Cypress Creek Fire Department, and I said that right, Jason Corthell. And I'm super excited. I'm just going to give you a quick intro and let everybody know who you are, at least
For
on
sure.
paper, anyways. So
For
he's an
sure.
active fire deputy chief or divisional chief. He's an international speaker where you can learn more about him on his Ironclad Wellness site, and we're going to pass that email around. Which I love the logo, by the way,
Thank you.
Jason. You're a certified instructor on fire protection. You graduated from Texas A&M on their fire service chief executive officer program. You're peer support and resilience certified. You're an EMS instructor. And in 2015, which I think is incredible, you were awarded the great state of Texas, because that's where you and I are at,
That's right.
the Texas Governor Star Award, which is amazing. We're going to get into that. And then just really thank you for your service. Jason's an honorable United States Marine Corps veteran. And just want to say thank you for, number one, serving our country and then serving our great state of Texas here, being a Texas resident. Thank you for everything you've been doing and what you're doing. So my first question to you is, why become a firefighter?
Um, I'm actually a fourth generation firefighter. So my grandpa, and my dad, my uncle, we're all part of the fire service. My dad's still in it. He's a volunteer captain in Oregon. And he serves up there in many different roles. He actually just got promoted to captain a few years ago, so it was cool to like pin his badge on and all that stuff. I surprised him
Wow.
up there, which was super special. But yeah, I mean, just to say that it's in my blood is a little cliche, but when you get into a walk of life or a job and you don't see yourself doing anything else in the world, there's no other kind of plan B. I think that really truly means that you're in your calling at that time. And when I started, going to school for the fire service and started going to the fire academy, there was never a dull topic. There was never a dull subject. It wasn't like anything I'd ever been through. You go through high school and there's math, and you're like, oh, dang, like, I got to go to math class today. But when I was in fire school, there was never any of that. I loved every topic because I knew that it was essential to my job. And so when I started going through fire school, I mean, I thought I loved the fire service before fire school, but fire school was the epitome of why I do what I do.
That's amazing. Yeah, I can relate to that on a sports level. I mean, going into spring training, or I've heard a lot of different people talk about, how people, especially at the higher levels, when they go into their job, they don't really consider it to be work. Like when I
Right,
went out and worked out, it was play. I got a chance to go be on the field for 8 hours and go do what I could, but I didn't consider it to be work. It
right.
wasn't boring. And I'm hearing the same thing from you.
Absolutely.
Um, so I want to jump right into some of this in terms of, because we have a lot to cover, and I really want to give you an opportunity to kind of spread your knowledge and your wealth around the mental health side. But
Sure.
can obviously firefighters, you go through a ton. And one thing that I learned, especially being around so many first responders and brave individuals that put on that badge or the nurses and everyone that does something to help someone in that day um, stand up for themselves. But you're dealt with adverse situations that you need to go into, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, God forbid. But can you explain a time with all of your training, with all the different calls that you've been on in your career, where there's been that one time when you pulled up on a scene or something in life? It doesn't even have to be firefighter related. Something in life where you had to take that deeper breath and go, oh my God, okay, I'm going in. That moment where there's that, you're going to cross that barrier of fear, of anxiety, of knowing there's going to be an outcome to this. I'm going to have to work through, but you know what? I'm going in.
Yeah,
Can you explain? And you don't have to go into great detail in terms of uh, what you saw and everything else to keep everyone, the triggers and everything in mind,
sure, sure, sure.
but definitely that mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think leading up to that, there's a lot of obviously resiliency that comes with it, and by resiliency, I think that we struggle a lot as a society, not just first responders for sure, but as a society, we struggle with the resiliency aspect. And I know through myself and other first responders, our resiliency, or what we coin the term resiliency means, is we're numb. We're numb to what we're seeing because we've just been accustomed to it. And so, you know, one time that sticks out to me, and there's been multiple times in my personal life too, and we can get into that as well. But as you're talking, and as I'm at work right now, I'm kind of in this mode, and one instance that really comes to mind, I was working for someone else. I did what's called a shift swap. So basically, they
Mm.
took off and they did a day for me, and I did a day for them. And usually that's when stuff happens, right? It's when you're not even supposed to be there and it
Yeah.
goes down. And so I was driving, I was on my way to get my hair cut. It was a Sunday, which is usually a pretty slow day. And I passed over a little overpass, and there's a creek underneath this overpass. And it's probably about a 30-foot drop. It's not huge, but it's a little bit significant. And I saw a girl on the side of the road on the edge of the bridge, and I'm thinking, well, that's strange because it's, 8:30 in the morning. No one's out here. Like, I'm pretty
Wow.
perplexed by this. And
Yeah.
everything in my mind told me to keep driving. Just keep driving. Like, she's probably just going for a walk, no big deal. But then my heart was like, hey, you got to turn around and talk to her, man. You got to turn around, because what if this ends up being a situation where, you could have prevented something? I'm like,
Yeah.
all right. So I turned around, I parked on the median there. I walked up to her pretty slowly, and I was like, hey, what's going on today? Are you doing okay? Like, and I could tell she was kind of out of it. She was distraught. I don't know if she was under the influence or if she had just been so, you know, beaten down with, whatever she was going through in life, that she was just out of her mind, essentially. And talked to her for a little bit. Ended up getting her in my vehicle, and I'm like, look, I'm gonna take you home. Where's your house? She was probably younger 20s, maybe late teens, and she just pointed to a random apartment complex that was in the area, and I knew at that point that she didn't have a home, you know, um, what she considered a home. And so I drove to the apartment complex. I dropped her off there, and I asked her. I said, "Is there anything on the other side of that door that's going to hurt you?" Because I didn't know where she was coming from, and she said no. She said she was fine. So she got out, and at that time, the ambulance had showed up because I had called for the medics to come check her out, and I was giving the pass down to the medics. And while that was happening, she ran back across the street, and then she proceeded to complete what she was trying to do. And so, um, you know, physically and mentally, it all came together when you talk about going in. Like, physically, I threw myself into the water and it went down the bank, threw myself into the water,
Wow.
grabbed her, got back up on the bank. myself and law enforcement were there, and we were working on her and trying to get her back. And obviously there was some physical injuries to her. Um, we ended up flying her live flight, and she ended up surviving, which was
Wow.
insane, right? But
Yeah.
when you talk about that and you talk about making that decision to either keep going and just don't even bother with it, or turn around and address the issue and take it head on, you know.
Mhm.
And I don't credit necessarily myself with that. I mean, I'm a man of faith, so I credit God with you know, being in my soul at that time and turning me around, man, and trying to make a
Yeah.
difference in this girl's life. And that's probably the biggest thing that sticks out to me, was that instance of when that happened. And again, I wasn't even supposed to be on shift that day. You know, I was covering for one of my buddies. And yeah, it's just crazy, all the circumstances that surrounded it, and how it all kind of played out. But it was a very raw experience, a numbing experience for me.
Yeah, I think I'm also a big believer, and I think God puts you in different places at the right time.
Absolutely.
Even though maybe it might be the wrong time to us in
Yeah,
that moment and the aftermath that we walk through, but He's always with us all the way through and
absolutely.
through, lifts us up with that strength. So that's amazing. What an amazing story.
Yeah.
And just the perseverance too. So you touched on resiliency, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
coping skills is another way to maybe think about that too. So, you were a Marine, right? You went
Sure. Yeah.
into
Mhm.
basic and you were, basically taught how to push emotions to the side and accomplish your task. But prior to that, how do you define, like, I mean, this I have a lot of uh listeners from all walks of life, right?
Sure.
And one of the things I wanted to touch on today was I want to get back to this story and the aftermath, but that PTS, PTSI, PTSD,
Sure.
it's all trauma, right?
Right, right,
And
right.
that's how I relate it when I go out and speak. I relate the trauma part of like what I dealt with in Las Vegas or other things in life um, to trauma, right? So when you're talking about Jason prior to like being a Marine and prior to being an amazing firefighter and prior to that moment and jumping off the bridge yourself, not knowing what was going to happen when you hit that water, whether you were going to live or not, just to be able to go in and try to save somebody you don't even know. Um, where did that coping skill, where did that resiliency kind of come from? Was it something that was built? Was it something you felt like you were born with? Um, where does that kind of manufacture within your body, within the way of your life, to where in that moment you just went?
I think I don't know how to use this term without sounding negative, but I think a little bit of ignorance goes into it. Ignorance and avoidance, right? And that's the issue, right? Is we try to find the balance between resiliency and not letting it affect you the way that, you know, it might affect other people, and all that stuff. And then we think about ignorance and ignoring the feelings inside. So like, and it's hard because you can't see it, right? You can't see it until it's on display. You're either like, hey, this guy's really jacked up, or this girl's really jacked up from what they've seen, or hey, this person is good to go because they're talking about their feelings. You don't know until one of those two things happen, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I mean, being young and growing up, I was exposed to a lot of things very early in my life. I grew up, you know, watching my mom get abused.
Mm.
And my sister get abused, and you know, running to neighbors' houses and calling the cops. And I mean, it's just all kinds of crazy stuff that happened in my life. And you know, I know a lot of people have experienced that, and so I don't try to put, you know, my story on top of theirs. But as far as relating to, you know, what people have been through, and then taking those experiences and just becoming numb to those and not addressing those and putting those things in the back of my mind to never say again or never verbalize again, was the way that I handled it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point in my career, when we're talking about the lady on the bridge, um, I think that I didn't have an option, you know, like I didn't have the choice to just let this lady just lay in the water and die, you know.
Yeah.
Like, I was thrusted into this situation, and it's like, look, either you're going in there, or this lady's going to die right in front of you. And how are you going to live with yourself,
Yeah.
if you don't even try? And so I think that, we get thrusted into these situations. And my biggest thing is when we talk about resiliency and building resiliency to trauma in particular is, as first responders and as military folks, we're taught to react to any situation, right? And we are master reactors. Like we can react with the best of them,
Mhm.
and I think as athletes, I think that that's true too, is okay, a guy, hits a grand slam off of you. Okay, well, how are you going to react?
Right.
And so you prepare for all these reactions.
Mhm.
But what I think a lot of people neglect is preparing for what is going to happen down the road. You just don't know when it's going to happen. And so preparation is huge. And that's where I think we lack so much is the preparation side. And so when I talk about ignorance and I talk about my oblivion to life situations because I just wanted to throw stuff in the back of my mind. When I speak, I talk about cleaning your room and cleaning upstairs, right? And I think that that's extremely important because your mind as a protective mechanism just shuts down certain periods of time, right? And so when I was going through my divorce and I went through the collapse incident and I was going through, alcoholism and addiction, when I was going through all of that, those 4 or 5 years, I couldn't pinpoint a certain date, a certain year, a certain time of when I was going through all those things. And it wasn't until I sought counseling to where I was like, okay, this happened this day, this happened this day, this happened this day. And I built a timeline myself of when things happened. And now I know, but it took me actually cleaning my room upstairs to be able to revisit those things in a positive light instead of a negative light. Like no one wants to walk into a dirty room. So why would I go visit my dirty thoughts?
Tell
I
my
have
son that, please.
it, right. Yeah. But I mean, that's one of those things that I really try to harp on is, organize those thoughts upstairs, go sit with the counselor, go sit with the therapist, sit with your chaplain, sit with whoever.
So you bring that up. I think you're touching on a lot of really amazing topics because it's so relatable. And that's my big message to everyone is sharing that relatable story that someone can connect with, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yes,
that's
for
that's
sure.
why the power of speaking and what you're doing and getting out and talking about mental health and breaking the
Yeah.
stigma and becoming that, basically like a mental health warrior and just defying all that all that suppressed emotion that we grew up with
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I was raised in that way too, to not show your weakness, to
Yep.
suppress your emotions. And it wasn't my parents were good parents. I
Sure.
was very lucky and very blessed to have them and live in the lifestyle that I lived in. My dad was a major league baseball player, but I grew up in a major league clubhouse watching men go through defeat and success every day, every pitch, every moment of their
Sure.
life,
Sure.
and watching the strength of resilience in them trying to achieve that ultimate greatness or just hold on to that career because there's nothing else for
Yeah.
them. And you see guys come up and guys, go down and first responders and law enforcement and the things you're dealing with. That's your job. It's your
Sure.
livelihood. So you talk about coping, resilience, the ignorance of sorts. One thing that and we're going to circle back to some of these things, but one thing that I learned, which a firefighter let me know when I was in Connecticut, and it was really interesting. And he said, the difference between firefighters and law enforcement or EMS or nurses and whatnot. He said, when we go on a call, we're generally with 4 people. We deal with that crazy adversity in that moment. And then we come back to the firehouse together. We eat our dinners together. We eat our meals together. We process in our own way. We're there and we're all connected.
That's right.
And it makes it a little bit, I don't want to say easier, but better or less traumatic to cope with when you're by yourself. But in this situation, when you're jumping off that bridge, and you're defying it, you're by yourself. And now you're in that moment. And yes, you have a law enforcement officer there and you're trying to save this woman and you're kind of commanding this whole scene. At what point did you, in that situation, and then how did that situation, that feeling of I'm knocked down. Who came to you to help lift you up? At what point did you say, okay, I need to go talk to somebody? And how did that relate to what you had just mentioned a few minutes ago, to that 4 or 5 year span where you said, all right, I've gone through all this crap in my life. Man, I need to stand up. I need to bone my chest, pin my shoulders back. I'm going into therapy or counseling. Like, talk about those two moments, more about the mental approach to that.
Yeah. So, I guess the post incident kind of breakdown. I was at that, once that scene wrapped up and the helicopter took off with the lady and all this stuff. I mean, I really understood the magnitude of what just happened
Mm,
afterwards because
mm,
you're so dialed in, man. You're so dialed in. And again, I make a relation to athletes. I never played any big league ball or anything like that, but I played sports in high school, and I know how it can kind of get
yeah.
you kind of get that laser focus going, and you're not worried about anything else on the outside. That's kind of how it was for me in that time, and you have to be that way. You have to be that way in this job. And I understood what the magnitude of what just happened was because the EMS supervisor on scene gave me a hug and was like, "Are you okay?"
Mm,
And all this stuff. And she was a female, and usually females are a little more, touchy feely and give you a hug and talk
yeah.
to you. But then my fire chief showed up, and my fire chief doesn't do that. Like he just doesn't do that.
He didn't give you a hug?
Yeah. And he's like, helicopter took off and he's like, "Hey man, come here." And I'm like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he's like, "You all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." Just typical first responder
Yeah.
reaction, right?
Yeah.
He's like, "Come here." He's like, "Give me a hug." I'm like, "Who is this guy?" What'd you do with my fire chief? and
Wow.
yeah, he gave me a hug and I got back in my truck and what's crazy is this
Man.
is I got back in my it's a command vehicle, it's a truck. Um, and I started driving back to where I was going. I started driving back to my haircut.
Mm,
And I was soaking wet. I smelled. I mean, I just started driving back. And the first thing I did when I realized that, I realized that I had just been in a situation where my mind was so thrown off. I was so laser focused. I just forgot it even happened immediately. And I went back to my life to get my
wow.
haircut. And
Wow.
when that happened, I got scared and I called my wife and I was like, "Hey, like, I'm not going to tell you all the details right now." I said, "But I've been through something today." I said, "I have to go back to the station, shower, change, and I'll meet you at church. I'm not going to be able to get my haircut this morning." And it was on a Sunday, like I said. And so I was there and I pulled in. I walked into church with her and one of the pastors that I'm really, really close with is there. And he automatically just was like, "Come here, dude." He's like, "What's going on?" And, I'm trying to do my best, happy face.
Hold it. Yeah.
Yeah, trying to
Yeah.
get in and get out, and check the box of going to church on Sunday. And he didn't let that happen. And that was the first time that I realized like I needed to talk to somebody. I needed
Yeah.
to get it off my chest, and I did. And luckily, that's one of the scenes that I don't really hold as detrimental to my I guess mental well-being. There are a few others that do pop up every now and then. A lot of it comes with dreams,
Mhm.
and all that stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at with the mindset in that aspect. As far as post incident goes, there was a second part to your question that you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, it was more, well, first you hit on a really great topic, and I want to talk about my experience with church as it related to what you just
Yeah,
went through.
for
But
sure.
um the you went through some time in your life in that 4 or 5 years where you were drinking and
Yeah, yeah,
probably just suppressing everything and everything building up. But you mentioned that you found a counselor. So at
yeah,
what
yeah.
point, what made you turn around and go, you know what, I'm going into this. I need to go in and see someone. What what made that happen mentally? Did someone come to you? Was there
Yeah.
something you saw? Yeah.
So, we're gonna get raw here. I hope that
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah. Let's go.
So I got caught up in some infidelity with my now wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, and all of that just kind of collapsed my whole world, because I knew I was going to marry this girl. I knew she was way out of my league,
Mhm.
like she was just everything that I could ask for. And she's literally everything that I prayed for. And
Mhm.
and I had managed to screw that up again. And I had a choice to make at that time. And it was just keep doing what I've always done and run away and go find, solace at the bottom of a bottle. Go out and get poor social relationships with women, and continue down that road, addiction to pornography, addiction to alcohol, addiction to pain medicines, whatever could numb my pain. Or I could come up with a game plan and I could own this thing. And
Mhm.
that was tough. But the reason I did that is because of my wife today, because I knew that I wanted to marry this girl and I knew that she was going to be so good for my life, that I had a partner to walk through life with. And
Wow.
so I made that decision. And to answer your question kind of in a roundabout way, I made a list of 4 things that I wanted to change in my life and what I
Mhm.
wanted to do. And probably the biggest benefit that I got from those lists is I gave it to my supervisors. I gave it to my fire chief and I gave it to my assistant chief, because a lot of times when I was at work, that's when I was living in my garbage, because I was away from home. I was away from my girlfriend
Yeah.
at the time. And I said, you need to hold me to these. I said, this isn't a list that, just goes to the bottom of your pile on your desk. I said, you need to hold me to these. And they did. And I credit them and I credit my wife for making me get into those steps. And one of them was counseling. One of them was being a better dad, spending more time with my kids, and not my addictions. Getting into church, being an active member of the church, meaning you don't just show up for Sundays and leave, after the hour and a half.
Yeah.
And so some of those things, man, like literally I had to own it. And you asked, was it a person? Was it a feeling? It was 100% my wife. My wife, girlfriend at the time, man, she just brought it out in me. And sometimes we need those people to get us through that, snip at a time, and then you're off on your own. It's like riding a bike. You need those
Mhm.
training wheels for a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But eventually you're going to get off and you're going to go on your own.
Like you, I mean, you get out and the more you start speaking, the more stories you hear, right? But
Yeah, yeah,
the even the strongest warriors that I've ever come across, whether it's a Navy SEAL that has done some crazy stuff to firefighters, to
sure.
just people in their daily life that have overcome extreme odds and adversities, even the strongest warriors have to raise a hand.
Yeah,
And at some point in your life, you're like, man, I need some help.
yep,
I'm lost. Or there's this persona that you're putting off, this like beacon that's just bouncing, going, I'm not myself. Somebody help me. And
yeah,
in that moment, you took the reins and said, all right, you're my team, you're my peer support. i
yeah,
need i need help, chief. I need help. And they acted, they responded, they had the courage to be able to hold you accountable and lift you up so you
that's
can
right.
walk tall again for yourself, and then walk tall for others. And I have that same circumstance, that relatability. When I got back from Las Vegas during the shooting. And there I am in Dallas, DFW, and I'm in my truck and I'm trying to process what the hell just happened 8 hours prior to that, and I'm tore up and my body's in pain. And I've got to go now pick up my kids that are at a baseball field where my son was playing in a little game. And I've got to go to work. And here I have my wife, and I got to get my truck and drive. And like you said, kind of flip the switch of, okay, I just experienced all these
Yeah,
things. I had death in my arms. Just trying to process all that silence and everything else that happened. And I got a call from a gentleman that served over in Afghanistan, 3 tours, and said, "Hey, here's your next 72 hours. This is what it's going to look like." And he gave me this survival guide. And then there was a fire captain up in Rockland, California, a buddy that I had grown up with, Chad Vert, says, "How are you doing, buddy? What's
yeah,
going on?" A buddy of mine that was, FBI terrorist task force, 26-year career as an officer in Southern California. "How are you? What is going on? I'm here for you.
yeah,
LAPD Metro, I'm here for you." Like, all these different people came out of the woodworks, my dad and everyone else, like, what's up?
Yeah.
And people like you mentioned that you normally, maybe you give a bro hug to every once in a while,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't get that caressing, like, I got you hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I
Exactly.
totally relate to what you just said. And it gave me goosebumps because it's so impactful when not only when you go through that trauma, but now you know what that person may be experiencing in some person that crosses your path. And now it's your job and your obligation, your duty as a human being to now reach out and have that courage to help, right?
That's right. That's right.
As long as it's not going to set you back enough. But talk about faith.
Yeah.
So when I got back, it took me a while to try to understand what the heck was going on. The nightmares, I still have those. Unfortunately, it's just part of it. But now
Sure.
I went through EMDR therapy. That allowed me to process every 1 minute of where my boots took me in that 8 hour journey throughout that night, uh, replay that movie so I could process everything and keep my trauma in front of me and not back in the back of my skull, knocking on my
Absolutely.
brain.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying, clean up your room.
That's
I
it.
try to keep it clean all the time. But going to church, I remember, man, it was like our second time because the first time we went, we were sitting in the back. I'm not, I'm scanning the whole room. I'm not trusting anything. I'm barely there, but I can
Yeah.
feel it. I'm starting to melt. Well, the second time we went, we're sitting in the far back corner, and all of a sudden the armor just came off, and the song was being played,
Hmm.
and I literally just melted. And there I am. I got my wife, and I think my kids were there, and I'm not a crier, but I am. I'm tearing up, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to hold it in, but it's
Hmm.
coming out. And all of a sudden, the pastor was right behind me. Didn't even know he was there, and he put his hand on my shoulder. And I looked, and he just kind of gave me this nod, like it's going to be okay. And then he walked up and did his thing, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like I'm not alone in all this fight.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be alone, right?
Yeah.
So when you like got all this strength and everything, what then turned it for you where you said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to do more. I'm going to get out. I'm going to talk. I'm going to create ironclad wellness."
Yeah.
What started that for you?
Yeah. And that, just to go back to your story and your recollection of, what happened in the series of events, man, worship gets me too. The national anthem can get me sometimes,
Yeah.
but worship gets me too. So you're not
Yeah.
alone in that fight either. Still to this day. Um, when I went through everything that I went through, and I went through the collapse, and then I went through, obviously the lady we've been alluding to that tried to take her life, and I went back to the station, and at that time we had just started a mental wellness program, and um, my wellness program was putting gym equipment in every fire station. That's what my wellness program consisted of.
Yeah.
Was we're just going to let these guys work out and work through it, right? Because that's what I did um, initially. I didn't address mental health issues, and I'd been through it, and the department I was with at the time didn't have a mental wellness program. They just had a bunch of guys that covered up for me in my addictions and in my struggles. And I'm talking showing up to work drunk, under the influence, just being being an idiot, and not being called out. And my guys thought they were helping me by covering it up, and really I needed to be called out at that time. And so when I started this mental wellness program with Dr. Liz Fletcher, who works at the University of Houston, she
Hmm.
does a lot of work in the trauma and resiliency area, but she was also a firefighter here as well, which was super cool because she
Wow.
understood kind of both aspects. And she's a self-proclaimed academia nerd, and I'm kind of the opposite. And so we work really well together. And she's like, "Hey, I know you're doing a wellness program, but have you thought of the mental wellness aspect?" And I'm like, "Nope, and I'm not interested because I do not want to go down that road. Like I've been down there, I just, the guys can work out and they'll work through it. They have me to talk to if they need to." And we're talking about 150 other men out there and women that can come talk to me, which is unrealistic, right?
Yeah.
Um, and she kept pressing and she kept pressing. And I was like, you know what? I was like, fine, we'll build a mental wellness program. And it took about 5 years to create. Um, if I had it my way, I would have created in about 5 months, and I would have just rolled something out and been like, all right, here it is, use it if you want. But Liz really slowed me down.
Is that because it just was like an adoptive thing? Like people just weren't buying in that 5 years, and it took 5 years to kind of manufacture to get adoption, or what took that so long?
Yeah, so in the fire service especially, but I mean, law enforcement is just now coming around to the
Yeah.
idea of what it looks like for a mental wellness program, and that's sad because they really, really need some help.
I Yeah, they
And
do.
and that's not a knock against them at
No,
all.
no,
Love
but they're by
them, love them,
themselves
but
after
they're in
these calls.
isolation. They're in
Yeah.
isolation,
Yeah.
and so when we're looking at this program, I'm thinking, okay, 5 months, we'll roll it out and it'll be good. But Liz slowed me down, and I think what our consensus was is, look, we need to do this thing, and we're going to be doing it from scratch. There's not another program out there, at least in our area, that we can adopt and tweak, which is what happens a lot of times with first responder organizations. You'll put out a cell phone policy per se, and then you'll go down the street and they'll have your cell phone policy and they'll just tweak it and put their names in it. And
Mhm.
then they have your policy. And so we piggyback a lot of policies off one another. We were trying to do that with this. And I'm like, we can't. There's nothing out there. There's nothing out there.
Wow.
And so we started developing this program, and it's nothing, extraordinary. It's 3-tier program. It's professional counseling, peer support, and chaplaincy. That's it.
Mm.
And but we took so long because one, we had to draft all of the documents from scratch. We probably have about 13, 14 different documents that come with the program. It's everything from SOPs to code of ethics to peer support tracking charts and all that stuff, right? And the reason that it took that long is because I knew that we were messing with people's lives.
Mhm.
By messing with, I probably had a better term, we were dealing with people's lives, right? And their livelihood. And so when I put a program together, I'm not going to put out this crap program that's going to steer somebody the wrong direction. And then I've contributed negatively in their life. Something gets out, something leaks, they have a mental wellness concern and they address it. And then the whole department knows about it. Like, I cannot have that. I cannot
Yeah.
have that happen. And so it took a long time to get those pieces into place and roll something out. So me being a first responder, I'm like, okay, there's a job. We go to the job, we do the job, and we go back home. Well, Liz in academia is like, all this stuff has to be put into place before we roll anything out. So I'm like light speed, she's pulling the reins back. And that's kind of how that's why it took so long. It wasn't because, we were oblivious to what the problem was, or we were ignorant to what the issues were,
Right.
or we were taking our time. We were more or less concerned about the effect that this mental wellness program is going to have on somebody, and it's got to be right the first time you roll it out, you
Yeah.
know. So that's why it took so long. That's why it took the process that it did. But I started that whole thing with her because I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. I don't want any, and by going through what I went through, it's not the adversity, because that's going to come, right? We all know that. But going through what I went through was not having the program and not having certain elements available, made known to me, that I didn't have the help. I didn't have the help I needed when I went through those things. And on top of that, I didn't have the resiliency for those things either. And
Yeah.
so it's like, I'm gonna make damn sure that my people in my organization have these things. And what's sad is when I go around and I speak and I get to talk to organizations, I'd probably say up to 60, maybe even 70% don't have certain elements or don't have a program at all. And it's
Yeah.
sad. It's sad.
Yeah, that is sad, but that's where what you're doing and getting out and speaking, what I'm doing and getting out and
Sure.
speaking, others, I mean, you're just joining the fight, right? To try to
Absolutely.
spread more awareness to these programs that you have developed. I know up here, and I'm just speaking on more experience in my relationship with like Paul Rust. He's a fire chief at Little Elm Fire, which is our neighboring town up here in Frisco, Texas, and they've got a guy Jeremy Fuller that is building programs and mental health, mental wellness, and they have someone that they reference, Dr. T, that is similar to the doctor that you're
Yeah.
working with, she has experience. I think her family was in law or was first responder or something, but there's relatability to it, right? So when you talk about counseling, and I think this has a big play in it too, in the programs that you build, it has to be relatable to that type of trauma that you're experiencing on a daily level, right?
Right, right,
Because it doesn't do any. I know when I got back and I went to go see a therapist for the first time, she looked great on paper, great accolades, like super, all these, awards and all these things. And she was EMDR certified. I was told, like, that's what you need to go see at that particular moment. That's what you need in your life. And I went up there and I couldn't get past my 8 seconds
yeah,
of time. There's no way I'm going to pass. I'm going to hit that ninth second and go into the details with you because you will not sleep. I'm going to ruin your life with my story and what I'm about to unleash. So you need
yeah.
to find that relatable person, right? And I would imagine the program that you're building, like you said, it has to be right the first time, has to have relatability to it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So people adopt it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a big thing for me was establishing cultural competence right away.
Cultural
Cultural
competence.
competence in first responders. And
Yeah.
so our chaplains, I just recently actually, I think last week I got chaplain certified. So I'm one of three chaplains now. Um,
Congratulations.
thank you very much. So we have three chaplains that have all worn the badge. Two of us are active still. One is Dr. Fletcher. She actually took her chaplaincy course too, and um, so there's cultural competence there, right? And then peer support. I mean, they're all the boots on the ground, right? And that's who we need. We need peer support. And what I say about peer support too, especially in the fire service, is we've been doing peer support for since the beginning of time as
Mhm.
firefighters, right? Like we've
Yeah.
we've been doing it. When you sit down at the breakfast table and you're talking about the bullshit that's going on at the house, and your wife is doing this, or your husband's doing this, and it's making you upset or whatever, like that's diffusing in a way, and a lot of times that's what our peer support meetings are about. When you meet with somebody, it's a quick 15-20 minute hot shot, boom, you're done, you're out, you blew it off, you're good. But as far as the counselor side, that's where I think we've made the greatest strides and kind of innovations. Um, I wanted to make sure that these folks knew their counselors, and I wanted to make sure the counselors knew us. And so I embedded our counselors into the fire stations. And I said, you're going to go out on calls with them. You're going to eat meals with them. You're going to watch TV with them. You're going to see what they do for training. And luckily, we actually
That's
have
awesome.
two certified counselors that are first responders as well. And so that helps, because
Yeah.
the other counselors in the office can talk to them. And so what I did is what Liz and I did, we took the stigma away by just saying, look, there's going to be counselors in your fire station. Whether you choose to interact with them or not, that's up to you. I'm not going to force you to talk to anybody, but they are going to be there, And at first I was met with a lot of resilience,
Mhm.
like the guys are like, I'm not talking to a witch doctor and she's going to try and read my mind and all this stuff, and they get all spun up out of control about it. And
Yeah.
eventually it got to the point where uh, the different crews were kind of competing for who the counselor came and saw. They were
Mm.
like getting upset. They called me and be like, "Hey, did Michelle come to the station today?" And I'm like, "No." I was like, "She went to 23s today." And they're like, "Oh, why'd she go to 23s?" I'm like, "That was her rounds, man." So like they
Yeah.
started missing,
Oh,
the counselors coming by, and that was
yeah.
like kind of the turning point for me. Was like, okay, they're starting to buy in now, And I think opening it up to families and the children were a huge win
Yeah.
for the guys and the gals, is the fact that we not only provide for them, but we provide for their wife and their children, because as well as I do, when you're out on the road and you're on a stretch where you're away for 2 weeks playing baseball and you come back home, all your wife wants to do is hand you the kids and be like, I'm done, and you're
Yeah.
exhausted and
Yeah.
everything else. And that's the same thing with the fire service is, we got to get the home life right, because if the home life's not right, you're not going to be showing up to work and being productive. And that was our main focus, was to make sure home is home base.
That's so key. I mean, it's relatable really anywhere. You think about a corporate setting, the pressures that we have in the boardrooms to creating our livelihood. So we're getting paychecks coming in to support our family,
Yeah.
to what our family goes through when we're either stressed out or, in a multi kind of working family where everybody might be doing their own thing. I mean, there's just mental health issues that fly everywhere. And so
Absolutely.
for you guys to provide that service, where it's also too, I think it's relatable because they're seeing their moms or dads go through that fire job, which is very strenuous anyways. And now they're actually like saying, hey, you know what? I've checked my tough box off. I talk about that a lot. Like,
Yeah.
you've checked your tough box off. Most everybody has at some point in their life gone
Sure.
through some sort of crap that when they get through that, they can check that off. You never ever have to show weakness again
That's
in
right.
terms of, I'm going to suppress, I'm going to hold back, I'm not going to go get help, I'm not going to reach my hand up to allow someone to pick me up. You've already checked it off. Just go
Sure.
talk about it. I know, I was at a wedding. So I'm ordained and
Right
I've
on.
done 3 weddings. So it's been pretty
That's
cool.
super cool.
Yeah, all family stuff. But
Love it.
I spoke, just in the power of sharing a story. A gentleman came up and said, "Hey, I wanted to." He was part of the groomsmen, and he said, "Hey, I want to just say thank you for what you did, and I'm just honored to shake your hand." And I said, "I was just there at the right time, and I just did what I could to help people."
Absolutely.
And he said, "Yeah, I'm a Marine," and turns out he's, apparently one of the most decorated Marines that we've seen in modern times, and little badass, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's non-active now, and so I don't know. Do Marines actually go non-active? I mean, you're kind of always active, aren't you? But
Yeah.
uh, but all of a sudden, he starts sharing a story about something that happened with him in a battle overseas, and he starts to well up.
Mm.
And it was in that moment, like we're standing outside, right? And we're on this kind of deck and in the countryside. And it could have been more perfect and more surreal, to where it was just the moment where he felt vulnerable
Yeah.
and he was allowed, and I was approachable, right? And that combination just hit. And there I am, and he's telling me these things. And we just had that like bonding moment where we just like were welded together for a second. Like you said, that 15 minutes, this was more like a 3-minute throwdown.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, I said, hey, do you have somebody, like, do you have people that you can talk to about this? I said, are you,
Sure.
are you getting this shit off your chest?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, not really. And I said, I challenge you, man. Like, call some of your brothers up. You know, they're going through the same thing.
Yep.
Your
Yep.
brothers and sisters that you were side by side with, let them know that you're struggling. You're one of the toughest SOBs I've probably ever met in my life. You don't have to bow down to anybody. You're like living on high. He's a good looking
Yeah.
guy and he's doing all these things, right? And I think that's the hardest part is I think when people realize that even the toughest of the tough have have issues with being vulnerable
Yeah.
and sharing their emotions, it's okay. That's an okay raw feeling to have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So let it out, because
Yeah.
I'll tell you, this conversation with you and me, I mean, we just met,
Sure.
and you shared some pretty incredible like stories that maybe some of your family don't even know about. And it's an honor to hear your vulnerability, your strength, because that's where it comes from.
Sure.
And you are a mental health warrior, man, and it's
I
just
appreciate
awesome
that,
to
bro. You
me.
too.
Plus you got a really cool mustache.
I'm working on it. Working on. I shaved it off during the summer, so this is my winter mustache. So
Your winter mustache,
yeah,
that's
my winter
hilarious.
mustache.
Hey, so one last thing before we wrap up. um if there's someone struggling right now, and one thing I learned, like when you're doing podcasts, unless there's a group of people actually watching the show, which would be awesome.
Right. Right.
However, we're talking to the one person that's probably out walking right now,
Yeah.
listening to the show, or sitting at their desk doing some work.
Mhm.
If they're struggling right now, what's your biggest advice to somebody that's maybe experiencing some trauma, coming from your experience and what you've learned in working with some of the toughest kind of people in the industry with being firefighters, first responders, but what's your advice to them on how they can maybe stand back up for themselves?
Yeah, I think my biggest fear was the fear of stigma, and I got to the point, and I know that's a key term and it's cliche and a little bit, but if I break it down, I was just speaking to someone the other night who's going through a divorce with their wife, and called me up at like 11 o'clock at night, and I went out and smoked a cigar with them and hung out and talked, and he's like, man, he's like, I've been going through everything and now I just came clean about everything to everybody. And I just feel guilty that I have this sense of freedom now. And I'm like, do you know how exhausting it is to lie to others and to keep things hidden and to go through life and not, exude relational value in yourself with other people? Like that is exhausting. Isolation can be exhausting. Um, the armor that you put up that you talked about when you dropped at church, that armor, literally carrying it around is exhausting.
Mhm.
And so I would say this to somebody is you coming clean or coming out with whatever your struggles are, whatever your situation is, it's going to free you. You're going to feel an automatic weight lifted off your shoulders that you've never felt before. You're
Mhm.
going to sleep better. You're going to eat better. You're going to feel better. I mean, the benefits are absolutely astronomical. And I know, for an instance, when I came clean and I owned my situation, I didn't know that those things were going to happen. And that's the scariest part is you have to jump, you have to leap, you have to be able to understand that, okay, well, this guy who's been through a lot of crap is telling me that if I do this, there's going to be benefits. So I'm going to trust in that and I'm going to go. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's one thing, if they're listening to this podcast right now, more than likely they've either been through it and now they're walking tall, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Or they haven't made that leap yet,
Mhm.
but the fact that they're listening to this podcast is starting to show that they're ready to rock,
Yeah.
that they need, you or I aren't going to say anything in this podcast that's going to, you know physically make them move in one direction to another. It's got to be upstairs. It's got to be a mental thing. They have to make that decision and say, you know what, I am going to get help, because these two guys right here that are talking about it, that are being raw about their emotions and their stories, that's empowering. I hope I empower other people, and when
Yeah.
other people come and talk to me, like you said, man, it's so empowering. Like
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, just because I'm up here speaking doesn't mean that your stories don't blow mine out of the water,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Um,
Totally
and,
true.
and
Yeah.
so that's kind of, that's my advice to other people is, if I told you right now that you can live a better life, you can walk with your shoulders pinned back, like you said, you can have that clarity, you can be a better dad, a better husband, a better wife, a better mother, and all you have to do is XYZ. Why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah.
What's stopping you from doing it? Because I do think we're making progress in the mental health realm. I do think that
Yeah.
that the stigma is starting to get pulled down a little bit, and numbers are showing a little bit of progress and
Mhm.
whatnot. As much as the media wants to push this agenda, that the world's spinning out of control, I do believe that good things are still happening, and I
I
think
do
that we
too.
are on the cusp of a breakthrough with mental wellness. I don't think that there's anything you can't throw at mental wellness that's negative. Everyone has their own walk.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful. Jason, this was an absolute honor having you on, man. You threw so much like wisdom chunks all over the place, and it was cool. Just listening to you talk, it brought emotion out of me. Yeah, it's great. And like you said, I know I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to get back to my daily life
Yeah, yeah,
and working in sports and what I do, but this motivated me to just carry on. And that's all
good.
we're trying to do, right? Just keep our
Absolutely.
boots moving forward, keep walking tall for ourselves. So how do people get a hold of you? I know I'm going to share, for anyone listening right now, hop on in the descriptions because I'm going to share your link to you. But I know you're speaking. You've got some talks coming up
Hmm.
here,
Hmm.
but best way to get a hold of you is through
Yeah.
ironcladwellness.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ironclad Wellness, there's a contact page. You can contact me right through there. It doesn't go to a secretary. It doesn't go to a team. It goes directly to me. So you're going to be speaking directly with me. So if anyone, feels the need to talk about some things, I'm always available to hop on a phone call, hop on a Zoom. Speaking events, mentoring, coaching, all of those things are available. My documents that come with my program are all available to everyone as well. And I would love to hear from anyone out there that needs help. That's what I feel like I'm putting on this earth for
Yeah.
is to help others. So I appreciate you having me, because you saying the honor is yours. No, the honor is mine to be able to be considered out of all the people that you probably have on your list, to be considered to be sitting here and chatting it up with you, and what I call making sausage. So I like it.
Yeah, that's right. Making sausage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything I can ever do for you, amplifying your message, especially what y'all are doing down in Houston and
Yeah, for sure, man.
spreading it
Same here.
across the country. And let's try to get that 70% of
Mm,
organizations, departments, first responders.
yes.
Let's try to
Yep.
get that number way down.
Yeah.
And let's try to spill this into law enforcement and into our veterans
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
and really just help where we can. So thank you, sir,
Absolutely.
for being on. It was an honor.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.